After the sauna, life didn't suddenly transform the way movies always promised it would. There was no dramatic revelation waiting around the corner. No emotional breakthrough that instantly solved years of confusion. Nobody made a grand confession. Nothing happened that clearly divided my life into a before and an after. At least not on the surface. Instead, everything changed quietly. The shift was so subtle that I didn't notice it immediately. It appeared in small moments, in unexpected thoughts, in the way certain parts of my day suddenly seemed brighter than they had before. I found myself thinking about Daniel far more often than I wanted to admit. At first, I blamed it on everything that had happened. The conversation at the cafe, the invitation, the fact that he had somehow recognized a part of me that I had spent years trying to hide from the world. But as the days passed, I realized it was more than that. Every time my phone buzzed with a message from him, I felt an immediate warmth in my chest. Every conversation seemed to stay with me long after it ended. Sometimes I would catch myself replaying things he had said hours earlier, smiling at comments that weren't even particularly funny. It was ridiculous, and honestly a little alarming. For years, I had become accustomed to feeling isolated, even when surrounded by people. I had friends. I had family. Yet there was always a distance between who I was and who people thought I was. Daniel had somehow stepped into that distance. For the first time in years, I felt understood. Not judged. Not analyzed. Not tolerated. Understood. And somehow that feeling was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it was something I had been searching for without realizing it. Terrifying because I didn't know what to do with it. One Friday evening, nearly 2 weeks after our visit to the sauna, I was sitting alone in my apartment. The television played quietly in the background, casting shifting colors across the walls. Some crime drama was unfolding on the screen, but I couldn't have told anyone what it was about. My attention was elsewhere. I was stretched out on the couch, scrolling aimlessly through my phone while rain tapped softly against the windows. The evening felt ordinary, predictable, the kind of night that would pass without leaving any memory behind. Then my phone rang. The sound startled me enough that I nearly dropped it. I looked down at the screen. Daniel. A smile appeared before I could stop it. I immediately answered. Hey. Hey, he replied. His voice carried the familiar calmness I had begun looking forward to hearing. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Not because anything was wrong. The silence simply felt comfortable. Then he asked, "Any plans tonight?" I glanced around my apartment. The answer was obvious. No, not really. A brief pause followed. I could hear faint traffic noises in the background wherever he was. Then he spoke again. "Want to get out of the city for a few hours?" I sat up straighter. The invitation caught me off guard. Get out of the city? Yeah. His voice sounded almost amused. Thought it might be nice. I couldn't help smiling. There was something exciting about the spontaneity of it. Something unexpected. For most of my life, I had been the type of person who planned everything. Every decision. Every possibility. Every outcome. Daniel seemed to move through life differently. More freely. More naturally. And somehow, whenever he invited me into that world, I found myself wanting to follow. "Where are we going?" I asked. A short laugh came through the phone. "Trust me." I shook my head despite the fact that he couldn't see me. "That's not actually an answer." "I know." "So?" Another pause. Then he said, "Come on. It'll be an adventure." The smile on my face widened. An adventure. The phrase sounded ridiculous. And yet, hearing it from him made me laugh. For a moment, I stared out the window at the rain-covered streets below. A sensible person would have asked more questions. A sensible person would have wanted details. A destination. A plan. Instead, I found myself standing up and reaching for my jacket. "When do we leave?" I asked. Daniel laughed softly. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." As the call ended, I looked around my apartment. Nothing had changed. The television still played. Rain still tapped against the windows. The city outside continued exactly as it had before. Yet somehow, everything felt different. Because for reasons I couldn't fully explain, I was excited. Not just about wherever we were going. About him. About spending time with him. About discovering what came next. And as I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, one thought followed me into the night. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't overthinking the future. I was simply looking forward to it. Leaving everything behind an hour later, I was sitting in the passenger seat of Daniel's car, watching the city slowly disappear behind us. The rain had eased into a light drizzle, leaving the streets shining beneath rows of streetlights. Buildings slipped past the windows one by one, their glowing signs reflecting across the wet pavement. I still had no idea where we were going. Normally that would have bothered me. I like plans. I liked knowing what came next. But somehow with Daniel, uncertainty didn't feel threatening. It felt exciting. Daniel rested one hand casually on the steering wheel while soft music played through the speakers. The dashboard lights cast a gentle glow across his face. For a while neither of us spoke. The silence settled comfortably between us. Not awkward. Not forced. Just quiet. I found myself staring out the window, watching the city fade into the distance. The familiar streets became unfamiliar roads. The crowded buildings gave way to open spaces. Traffic thinned. The air itself seemed different somehow. Lighter. Fresher. Eventually Daniel glanced over at me. "You okay?" I smiled. "Yeah." "You look surprised." "I am." His eyebrow lifted slightly. "About what?" I laughed softly. "The fact that I got into a car with someone who refused to tell me where we're going." Daniel chuckled. "You're still here." "Barely." "Sure." His smile widened. I shook my head and looked back out the window. The truth was, I wasn't worried at all. If anything, I felt unusually relaxed. For most of my life, I had carried a constant tension inside me. A pressure I rarely acknowledged. The pressure of hiding. The pressure of pretending. The pressure of always wondering what people would think if they truly knew me. That pressure had become so normal that I barely noticed it anymore. Until recently. Until Daniel. Somehow, being around him made that weight feel lighter. Not gone. Just easier to carry. The road stretched endlessly ahead of us. Dark fields replaced crowded neighborhoods. Trees lined both sides of the highway. The city lights became smaller and smaller until they finally disappeared altogether. The only illumination came from the headlights cutting through the darkness ahead. For a while we talked. About work. About travel. About places we wanted to visit someday. Daniel told me stories from his 20s. Stories I'd never heard before. Some were funny. Some were embarrassing. One involved getting lost in a foreign country after missing a train. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my drink. "You actually did that?" He nodded. "Worse. I thought I could speak the language." "You couldn't?" "Not even slightly." I laughed again. The image was impossible to resist. Daniel looked pleased with himself. "I survived." "Barely, apparently." The conversation drifted naturally from one topic to another. Neither of us seemed concerned about where it was going, or where we were going. The destination no longer felt important. The journey did. Eventually, another comfortable silence settled between us. I noticed something then. Something that surprised me. Most people made silence feel like a problem. An empty space waiting to be filled. Whenever conversations paused, there was usually an invisible pressure to say something. Anything. But Daniel wasn't like that. He never rushed to fill quiet moments. He never seemed uncomfortable when words ran out. And because of that, I wasn't uncomfortable either. With him, silence felt peaceful. Like simply sharing space was enough. Like conversation wasn't necessary to prove a connection existed. I leaned my head back against the seat. The steady hum of the engine filled the car. Music played softly in the background. Rain tapped occasionally against the windshield. For the first time in a long while, my thoughts felt quiet. Not absent. Just calm. I wasn't worrying about tomorrow. I wasn't replaying old mistakes. I wasn't imagining worst-case scenarios. I was simply present. And that realization caught me off guard. Daniel glanced at me again. "You look relaxed." I laughed softly. "I think that's because I am." "Good." His answer was simple. But something about it warmed me. Because Daniel never seemed interested in fixing me. He never acted as though I was broken. He simply wanted me to be okay. And somehow, that mattered more than I could explain. Outside the window, darkness stretched across the landscape. The farther we drove, the lighter I felt. As if each mile placed more distance between me and the version of myself I had been carrying for years. The scared version. The lonely version. The version that constantly questioned whether he belonged anywhere. I watched the road disappear beneath us. And for the first time, I realized that maybe we weren't just leaving the city behind. Maybe I was leaving something else behind too. Something heavier. Something older. Something I no longer needed to carry alone. The thought stayed with me as the car continued through the night. And for once, instead of fearing whatever came next, I found myself looking forward to it. Almost 2 hours after leaving the city, Daniel finally turned off the highway and followed a narrow coastal road that wound through a small seaside town. Most of the shops had already closed for the night. Streetlights cast soft pools of golden light across quiet sidewalks. A few restaurants remained open, their windows glowing warmly against the darkness. Beyond them, I could hear the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. The moment we stepped out of the car, cool ocean air wrapped around us. It carried the scent of salt, rain, and something fresh that seemed impossible to find in the city. I took a deep breath. Daniel noticed. A faint smile appeared on his face. Better than traffic, right? I laughed. Much better. For the first time all evening he seemed satisfied with my answer. Without saying much else, we headed toward the beach. The shoreline stretched endlessly before us. Moonlight shimmered across the surface of the ocean, turning the water into a field of silver and black. Gentle waves rolled onto the sand before retreating back into the darkness. The entire scene felt unreal. Peaceful in a way I wasn't used to. The city always seemed to demand something from you. Your attention. Your energy. Your time. The ocean demanded nothing. It simply existed. And somehow that felt comforting. Daniel and I walked side by side along the shoreline. The sand shifted softly beneath our feet. A cool breeze moved through the air, occasionally lifting the edges of our jackets. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The silence felt natural. The steady rhythm of the waves filled the space between us. I found myself staring out at the endless horizon. The dark water stretched farther than I could see. It reminded me how small my worries really were. How much of my life I had spent trapped inside my own thoughts. For years, I had carried fear like a second shadow. Fear of being judged. Fear of disappointing people. Fear of not belonging. Yet standing there beside the ocean, all of it seemed farther away. Not gone. Just quieter. Daniel broke the silence first. You seem lighter. His voice was calm. Observant. Like he wasn't asking a question. Simply stating something he had noticed. I kept my eyes on the water. A small wave rolled toward the shore and disappeared around our feet. Maybe I am. The answer surprised me because it was true. For weeks, something inside me had been changing. Slowly. Carefully. Like a knot that had been tightened for years finally beginning to loosen. Daniel looked at me. I could feel it even before I turned my head. When I finally glanced over, a small smile rested on his face. Not a dramatic smile. Not an amused one. Just warm. Genuine. Good. One simple word. Nothing more. Yet it stayed with me. Because there was something remarkably sincere about the way he said it. Daniel wasn't happy because he had helped me. He wasn't proud of himself. He wasn't expecting gratitude. He simply seemed glad that I was okay. As if my happiness mattered to him for no reason other than the fact that it was mine. The realization caught me off guard. I looked away before he could notice. The ocean suddenly seemed very interesting. For most of my life, I had become accustomed to people caring about me in specific ways. Family cared because they were family. Friends cared because friendship came with expectations. But what existed between Daniel and me felt different. Simpler somehow. He listened because he wanted to. He showed up because he chose to. And whenever I seemed a little happier than before, it genuinely made him happy too. That realization settled quietly inside me. Warm. Comforting. Dangerous. Because it mattered more than I wanted it to. We continued walking. The waves rolled endlessly beside us. The town lights glowed faintly in the distance behind us. Somewhere far out at sea, a fishing boat moved slowly across the horizon. The world felt larger than usual. And for once I didn't feel lost inside it. Daniel shoved his hands into his jacket pockets and glanced toward the water. Funny, isn't it? What is? The things that end up helping us. I looked at him. He shrugged. A month ago, neither of us would have guessed we'd be standing here. I laughed softly. No. Definitely not. His smile widened. Life's weird like that. I couldn't argue. A month ago, Daniel had simply been my father's friend. Someone who existed in the background of family gatherings. Someone familiar. Someone safe. Now, somehow, he was becoming one of the most important people in my life. The thought should have scared me. Instead, it brought a strange sense of peace. We kept walking beneath the moonlight. The ocean stretched endlessly beside us. And for the first time in a very long while, I wasn't thinking about what was missing from my life. I was simply grateful for what was there. And as I glanced toward Daniel, watching the soft smile still lingering on his face, I realized something. Maybe that was exactly what happiness felt like. Not certainty. Not perfection. Just finding someone who was genuinely glad you were there. We eventually found an old wooden bench tucked slightly above the shoreline, half hidden between weathered posts and wild grass that bent gently in the ocean breeze. From there, the view stretched endlessly. The sea moved in slow, steady rhythms beneath the moonlight, and the town behind us had faded into a soft blur of distant lights and quiet streets. It felt like we had stepped out of the world everyone else was still living in. Out here, nothing demanded attention. Nothing interrupted us. At first, we just sat in silence. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that settles comfortably when two people no longer feel the need to perform for each other. The wind moved through the grass. The ocean breathed in and out below us. Somewhere far away, a single light flickered on a boat drifting across the horizon. I didn't know how long we sat like that before we started talking. But when we did, it didn't begin like a conversation. It began like an admission. Not one moment, but many small ones layered on top of each other. We didn't talk about work, or routines, or anything safe. We talked about fear. The kind that sits quietly in your chest even when nothing is wrong. We talked about loneliness. The kind you can feel even when you're surrounded by people who care about you. We talked about family. About expectations that are never spoken out loud, but still somehow shape everything. And somewhere in between those words we started talking about ourselves. Not the versions people saw, but the versions we kept hidden. The ones we only met in private moments of honesty. At one point I stopped speaking mid-sentence. My eyes dropped to my hands resting in my lap. I didn't know how to continue, or if I even should. The words that came next felt like they had been sitting inside me for years, waiting for a moment like this to finally escape. I always thought people would leave, I said quietly, if they knew everything about me. The sentence didn't feel dramatic when I said it. It just felt true. And somehow that made it heavier. The air between us shifted. Not in a frightening way. More like something subtle had opened. Something fragile had been placed on the table between us. I didn't look at Daniel right away. I was afraid of what I might see. Judgment. Confusion. Discomfort. Anything that would confirm what I had always believed. That honesty made people step back. The silence stretched for a moment longer than I could bear. When I finally forced myself to look at him, Daniel wasn't looking away. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't uncomfortable. He was simply there, listening. And in his eyes I saw something I didn't expect. Not pity. Not reassurance. Something quieter. Something deeper. Recognition. As if my words had reached a place inside him he already understood too well. I know that feeling, he said softly. 3 simple words. Nothing elaborate. Nothing rehearsed. But they landed with a weight that made my chest tighten. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was speaking into emptiness. I felt heard. Not because he was trying to fix anything, but because he didn't need me to explain it further. We sat there for a while after that. Neither of us rushed to fill the silence again. The ocean kept moving below us, indifferent and endless. But something between us had changed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't obvious. It was quieter than that. Like a thread had formed where before there had only been distance. And in that quiet space, I realized something I hadn't expected. Maybe I wasn't the only one who had been carrying things alone. Maybe Daniel understood more than he ever said out loud. And maybe, just maybe, that was why being near him felt so different. Because for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was the only one holding everything together. The first raindrops came without warning. At first, they were almost easy to ignore, soft taps against the ground, scattered and uncertain, like the sky was still deciding what it wanted to do. Neither of us paid much attention. We kept walking, talking in fragments, letting the ocean stretch endlessly beside us as if nothing in the world could interrupt this quiet moment. But then the rain changed. It deepened. It thickened. And within minutes, the sky seemed to give up entirely. A full storm rolled in over the coast. The wind picked up first, sharp and sudden, brushing through the grass and bending the trees along the path. Then the rain followed, heavier now, falling in fast, slanted sheets that blurred the shoreline and swallowed the horizon. "Okay, run," Daniel said, half laughing. We didn't need to be told twice. We turned and ran together toward the car, footsteps splashing through puddles forming almost instantly in the sand and gravel paths. I remember laughing as I ran, not because it was funny exactly but because it felt absurd. One moment we had been talking about life in silence and everything in between, and the next, we were sprinting through a coastal storm like children who had forgotten to check the weather. By the time we reached the car we were completely soaked. My shirt clung to my skin. My hair dripped into my eyes. Daniel looked no better, breathing slightly heavier, rainwater running down his face, his jacket darkened and heavy with water. And somehow that made me laugh even harder. He did too. It wasn't elegant laughter. It wasn't controlled. It was real. The kind that comes when you stop caring how you look for a moment. We got inside quickly, shutting the doors against the noise of the storm. The silence inside the car felt immediate, almost unreal after the chaos outside. Rain hammered against the windshield in relentless waves. The wipers moved back and forth, struggling to keep up, smearing streaks of light from distant lamps across the glass. Daniel started the engine and turned on the heater. Warm air slowly began to fill the car, wrapping around us like a soft contrast to the cold still clinging to our clothes. For a while, neither of us spoke. We just sat there, listening, breathing, watching the storm rage outside as if it belonged to another world entirely. My heartbeat was still slightly uneven from running, from laughing, from something I couldn't quite name. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes for a second. It felt strange how quickly everything had changed. The ocean, the silence, the conversation that had felt so heavy just moments ago. Now it was all outside the car, washed away by rain. Or maybe not washed away. Maybe just paused. Daniel shifted slightly beside me. When I opened my eyes, I saw him looking at me. Not staring. Just looking. Like he was thinking about something he wasn't sure he should say. Then quietly he spoke. "I'm glad you came." The words were simple. Almost casual. But there was something in his voice that made them feel heavier than they sounded. Sincere. Unguarded. Like he hadn't planned to say them at all. I turned toward him fully. For a second I didn't know what to say. My chest felt warm in a way I didn't fully understand. So I just answered honestly. "So am I." The air between us shifted again. Subtle. Invisible. But real. Our eyes met. And this time neither of us looked away. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Rain hitting the glass, wind shaking the trees, the world in constant motion. But inside the car, everything felt still. Contained. Focused down to just the two of us. It wasn't dramatic. Nothing was said beyond those simple words. Nothing changed in an obvious way. And yet I felt it. A quiet tension. Not uncomfortable. Not confusing. Just present. Like standing at the edge of something neither of us had stepped into yet. Something unspoken. Something waiting. I didn't know what it meant. And I wasn't sure Daniel did either. But as the rain blurred the world outside into soft streaks of light and sound, one thought settled in my mind with surprising clarity. Whatever this was, it wasn't staying simple for much longer. The storm didn't ease as we drove. If anything, it got worse. The rain came down in thick, relentless sheets, blurring the road ahead until even the street lights looked like smeared halos in the glass. The wind pushed against the car at times, strong enough that Daniel slowed down without saying a word. Neither of us spoke much. There wasn't really a need to. Every few minutes I'd glance at him. He was focused on the road, calm in a way that made everything feel slightly less chaotic than it actually was. Like no matter how hard the storm hit, he wasn't going to let it take control. After what felt like a long stretch of uncertain driving, a small sign appeared through the rain. A roadside hotel. Simple. Barely more than a building glowing softly against the dark weather. Daniel turned without hesitation. We pulled into the gravel parking lot, tires crunching against wet stone, and finally stopped. For a moment, neither of us moved. Just sat there listening to the rain hammer the roof. Then Daniel exhaled softly. "Looks like we're stopping here." I nodded. "Yeah, probably a good idea." Inside, the hotel felt warm in contrast to the storm outside. The lights were soft and yellow, the kind that made everything feel slightly slower, slightly gentler. A small reception desk stood near the entrance, and behind it, a woman looked up as we walked in, offering a polite, almost apologetic smile. "Only one room left," she said. The words hung in the air for half a second. Normally, that would have been the kind of situation that made everything awkward. Too close. Too uncertain. Too easy to overthink. But with Daniel, something about it didn't feel the same. He simply nodded. "We'll take it." No hesitation. No tension. Just acceptance. We carried our bags upstairs through a narrow hallway that smelled faintly of old wood and rain. The room was small but clean. A bed, a window streaked with water, a small table, and a single lamp casting a soft glow over everything. Outside, the storm continued like it had no intention of stopping. Inside, it was quiet. For a moment, neither of us knew what to do with that quiet. Then Daniel broke it naturally, like he always did, without forcing anything. "I'll order food," he said, already reaching for the phone. I nodded. "I'm starving, honestly." He smiled slightly. "You always are." That made me laugh. Not true. Completely true. Within minutes, we were sitting on the edge of the bed, eating simple hotel food that probably tasted better only because we were exhausted and slightly soaked, and still laughing about the fact that we had ended up here at all. The conversation didn't stop. It just shifted. From the storm, to random stories, to memories we hadn't thought about in years. And somehow, everything felt lighter than it should have. As the night deepened, the rain outside softened slightly but never fully stopped. It became a steady background rhythm like the ocean earlier that evening, constant, distant, almost soothing. Eventually we turned off the main light. The room dimmed into shadows, lit only by the faint glow coming through the rain-covered window and the small bedside lamp Daniel had left on. We lay back without really planning to. Not fully on either side of the bed. Just existing in the same space, close enough that the silence between us felt shared instead of separate. For a while neither of us spoke. Only the rain filled the room. Soft, endless, comforting in a strange way. Then, out of nowhere, Daniel's voice came quietly through the darkness. "You ever think about how different life can look in a year?" I turned my head slightly toward him even though I could barely see his face. A small smile formed without me realizing. "All the time," I said. Another pause followed. Longer this time. Not uncomfortable. Just thoughtful. Then Daniel spoke again. "I didn't expect this." The words were simple. But I understood them immediately. Because I felt the same. A year ago, nothing about my life had included this version of things. Not him. Not this connection. Not this strange, steady closeness that didn't fit into anything I had planned or imagined. "I know," I said quietly. And I really did. Silence returned after that. But it wasn't empty. It felt full. Like the kind of silence that holds meaning instead of avoiding it. I stared at the faint outline of the ceiling, listening to the rain, feeling the presence of him beside me. Months ago, Daniel had been nothing more than my father's friend. Familiar. Distant. Almost background noise in my life. And now he was becoming something else entirely. Something I didn't yet have words for. Something I didn't want to lose. That realization didn't arrive dramatically. It didn't hit like a shock. It settled slowly. Quietly. Like rain soaking into fabric over time. And as I lay there in the dark, listening to the storm outside and the steady rhythm of Daniel's breathing beside me, I understood something I wasn't ready to fully admit out loud. My life hadn't just changed because of where I was. It had changed because of who was beside me in it. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of that change. I was beginning to want it. The morning arrived quietly. No dramatic shift. No sudden return to reality. Just soft sunlight spilling through the thin hotel curtains, slowly filling the room with a warm, pale glow that made everything feel calmer than it had any right to feel after the stormy night before. For a moment I didn't move. I just lay there listening. The world outside was different now. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind a strange kind of silence, not empty but clean. The kind that only exists after something intense has finally let go. And then I noticed it. The smell of coffee. Fresh, warm, real. I sat up slowly and turned toward the window. Daniel was already awake. He was sitting near the window in a relaxed chair, one leg crossed over the other, holding 2 paper cups. The morning light framed him in a soft outline, making the scene feel almost unreal in its simplicity. When he noticed me moving, a small smile formed on his face. "Morning," he said. His voice was still slightly rough from sleep. I blinked a few times trying to fully wake up. "Morning," I replied. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There were no big emotions attached to the word itself. And yet it stayed with me. Because something about it felt different from every other morning I could remember. Calmer. Safer. Real in a way I wasn't used to. Daniel stood and walked over, handing me one of the coffee cups. Our fingers brushed briefly as he passed it to me. Just a second. Barely noticeable. And yet neither of us pulled away quickly. There was no awkwardness. No tension. Only a quiet awareness that even the smallest moments between us had started to feel meaningful. I took the coffee and looked at him properly for the first time that morning. He looked at ease. Not distant. Not guarded. Just present. As if nothing in the world was demanding anything from him in that moment except being here. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. Eventually we packed our things, checked out, and stepped outside into the fresh morning air. The sky was clear. Completely clear. As if the storm from the night before had never existed at all. The road back to the city stretched ahead of us, bright under the morning sun. Daniel drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting casually near the gear shift. I watched the landscape change slowly outside the window, Coastal roads giving way to highways, then buildings, then the gradual return of city life. It felt like crossing between two versions of reality. At some point Daniel spoke. "You okay?" The question wasn't heavy. It wasn't complicated. It was just him checking in the way he always did, simple, steady, without pressure. I looked out at the passing scenery for a moment. Then I turned back toward him. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't search for the right answer. I just gave the honest one. "Yeah," I said quietly. Pause. Then I added, "I think I am." A small smile appeared on his face. Not big. Not performative. Just real. "Good," he said. And somehow, that one word carried more meaning than anything else we had said that morning. We drove in comfortable silence after that. The city slowly began to appear in the distance, first as a faint outline, then as a clearer shape rising against the horizon. Buildings caught the sunlight. Roads became busier. Life started to return to its usual rhythm. But something inside me didn't feel like it was returning to anything. It felt like it had changed direction entirely. I leaned my head back against the seat and watched the skyline grow closer. The past few days replayed quietly in my mind. The invitation, the sauna, the ocean, the storm, the hotel room, all of it. Moments that should have felt random now felt connected in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. And somewhere in that realization, I understood something I hadn't been able to say out loud before. Whatever this was becoming between us, it wasn't something I wanted to step away from. It didn't feel confusing anymore. It didn't feel dangerous. It felt steady. Like something I had been moving toward without realizing it. Daniel glanced at me briefly as we entered the city limits. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. Because whatever had started between us wasn't ending at the hotel door. It was continuing. Quietly. Naturally. And for the first time in a very long while, I wasn't afraid of where it might lead. Because I finally understood something simple, something certain, something I hadn't known I needed. I wasn't facing life alone anymore.